The carriage came down Marsh Street at 3:30 on a Wednesday morning in October, and Faye Morden, widowed apothecary of Bristol's Harbour quarter, watched from her distilling room window as the door swung open and two men in dark coats tipped a third man out onto the cobblestones below. She was at the window because the foxglove tincture needed checking every hour through the night, and she had been awake since midnight. The body hit the stones with a sound she felt in her back teeth. The two men did not look up at her window. They pulled the door shut, and the carriage rolled away toward the quay without slowing. She counted to 30 before she moved. Then she set down the glass rod, took the lamp from its hook, and went out the side door. He was alive. That was the first thing she checked. 2 fingers pressed to the side of his throat, the lamp held low over his face. The pulse was there. Slow, wrong, not the thick, slow pulse of a drunk man. Thinner than that. Uneven. She had felt a pulse like this once before, and she had not liked it then either. She went back inside for the canvas sling she used to move flour sacks from the delivery door. She looped it under his arms and walked backward into the shop, pulling. He was heavy, and the cobblestones were wet from the afternoon's rain, and the doorframe stuck as it always did when the wood swelled in autumn. She got him through it by the time her arms began to shake. She laid him on the workroom floor on a length of old sacking, and held the lamp near his face and looked at him properly. He was perhaps 35. The collar of his coat was torn at one seam. His cravat had been knotted wrong, someone else's hands, not his own, in a hurry. His shoes were Oxford's, not 6 weeks out of the maker's hand. She knew that because she had stood at the window of that same maker's shop on Park Street the previous month, and looked at an identical pair in the display, and calculated the price against the quarter's rent, and put the thought away. A gentleman, then. A gentleman deposited on a Harbour Street cobblestone at 3:30 with someone else's hands at his collar and a pulse that frightened her. She smelled his breath first, then the inside of his wrist, then the stain at the left cuff. Foxglove, something else under it, bitter and faintly metallic, familiar in the way bad memories are familiar. She had worked in this shop for 11 years. She had mixed tinctures at her husband Rory's elbow for 4 of them, and then alone for the 7 since. She knew the smell of most things people used to hurt each other with, because most of them also had uses for healing, and healing was her trade. She knew the smell of arsenic. Not acute, not the kind that killed a man in an hour, the kind taken in small amounts over weeks or months. She had read of it. She had hoped never to smell it on a living person. She got her hands under his shoulders and hauled him to the narrow cot in the back room, where her apprentice had slept before she could no longer afford an apprentice. She stripped off the torn coat and the ruined cravat, and covered him to the chin with the wool blanket from the chest. Then she stood in her own workroom at 4 in the morning with a lamp in her hand, and considered the situation. He had no purse. His coat had been gone through, lining slashed open at the hem, pockets turned, but inside the breast pocket, caught in a fold of the torn lining where searching hands had not reached, was a small card case of polished horn. Inside that, a single card, plain white, a name engraved in black. Piers Carew. She set the case on the workbench. She put the kettle on the range. She went upstairs and stood in the doorway of the small room off the landing, where Ness slept curled against the wall, with her slate board propped at the bedside, and the chalk stub in her hand, the way she always slept, ready. Ness was 8. She had come to the shop 3 years ago with a woman who said she was not the child's mother, and who left after 10 minutes and did not come back. The fever that had taken her voice at the age of 5 had not taken anything else. She read mouths, she read faces, she read rooms. She watched things the way cats watch rooms, calmly, completely, without appearing to. Faye did not wake her. She went back downstairs and sat in the workroom chair, and kept watch until the grey came up against the harbour window. He opened his eyes on the second morning. She saw it happen. One moment he was still, and the next his eyes were open, and they were brown, and they were clear, and they were confused in the way of a man who is not expected to be looking at a ceiling he does not recognise. He said, "Where am I?" His voice was a gentleman's voice, educated, hoarse, careful even through the hoarseness. She set down the mortar she was working with and crossed to the cot and stood at the foot of it and looked at him. "An apothecary's workroom," she said. "Marsh Street, Bristol Harbour quarter. You were left on the cobblestones outside this door at 3:30 on Wednesday morning. Today is Friday." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the ceiling. He said, "I remember the carriage." She said, "What was in your glass?" He looked at her then, with the focused look of a man used to being asked questions and not accustomed to their being quite so direct. He said, "I don't know, it was not what it was poured as." She said, "I know the smell of what it was. I need to know how long the other thing has been in you, the slower thing, the one that has been in you for some time." He was still for a long moment. She waited. He said, "How long does it take to notice?" She said, "It depends on the dose. Have you had weakness in your hands? Difficulty with stairs? Nausea in the mornings that cleared by midday?" He shut his eyes. "Yes, since July." She nodded. She said, "Then it has been July at least, possibly longer if it started low." He did not say anything else for a time. The range crackled. The harbour wind came through the gap under the door, the way it always did. She said, "Your card case says Piers Carew." He opened his eyes. She said, "I am not going to put you out. I am going to ask you who poured your glass." He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "I do not know who stood at the sideboard. I know whose house I was in when I drank from it." She said, "Then tell me whose house." He said after another pause, "I went to a card party at my cousin Hadley's rooms in Queen Square. My cousin is the person who would inherit my title and my estate if I died without an heir. I have been in Nova Scotia for the better part of 3 years. I came home in August." He stopped. He said, "I would be grateful if you did not use the title at present." She said, "I am Faye Morden. The child you will see on the stairs is Ness. She does not speak. She hears perfectly, and reads mouths as well as you read print. You may speak in front of her as you like, and she will understand every word. If you would speak to her directly, write on her slate, or let her read your lips at close range." He looked at her with the careful look again. He said, "Is she yours?" She said, "She is mine." He said, "Yes," and did not ask anything further, which she noted. She brought him broth and small beer, and he ate slowly, and afterward he lay on his back and looked at the ceiling, and did not speak for the better part of an hour. Ness came down at 8:30 and stood in the workroom doorway, and looked at the man on the cot with her head slightly tilted, the way she looked at new things. Then she looked at Faye. Then she looked at the man again. Then she climbed onto the high stool at the bench and began labelling the small bottles as she did every morning, with the careful round letters Faye had taught her. After a while, the man on the cot turned his head and watched her label the bottles. He did not say anything, but he watched her for a long time, and Ness, without looking up, was aware of it, and took more care with the letters than was strictly necessary. He did not tell her the full of it until the third night, when the fever she had anticipated came up in him as the slower poison began to leave his system, and his body turned against itself in the clearing. She sat at the cot side through the worst of it. He said things that were not meant for her, the way sick people did. He said a name twice, Benedict, the second time clearly enough that she heard the shape of it. On the fourth morning, when the fever had broken and he was sitting against the wall with a cup of tea and his colour returned, she said, "Benedict." He looked at her over the rim of the cup. She said, "You said it in the night. I did not know if you meant to." He set the cup down on the blanket. He said, "My brother. He died at sea 3 years ago. He was 26. The ship was the Constance. I went to Nova Scotia after, because that was the last place he had been, and I did not know what else to do with the fact of it." He looked at the workroom window. He said, "I have not said his name in any room I have slept in since the month I got the letter. I did not know I still said it aloud." She said, "I am sorry." She was quiet a moment. Then she said, "Rory was my husband. He died 4 years ago. He was a good man and an honest one, and he was kind to me until the last week of it. He had loved a woman before me. He loved her until the day he died, and he was too honourable to pretend otherwise. I was a wife beside a ghost. I knew what I was when I married him, and I did not blame him for it. I blamed myself for hoping it would change. He looked at her, he said, "Did it?" She said, "No," and then, after a moment, "The ghost is still here. I have her portrait on the shelf upstairs. I had not put it there. I have not moved it. It is simply where it is." He said, "I am sorry." She nodded. She went to the range and lifted the kettle and poured. She said, "Tell me about Hadley." He told her. She listened without interrupting. By the time he finished, the tea had gone cold. Hadley Carew was his aunt, Lady Corinna's son. Lady Corinna had managed the Carew estates in Somerset while Piers was in Nova Scotia, and she had managed them with a hand tighter than the law quite allowed. Piers had come home in August and begun asking questions about the accounts. By September, he had found enough irregularities to know that 3 years of rents from 2 farms in Taunton had gone somewhere they should not have gone. He had sent for his solicitor. He had told no one else. The invitation to Hadley's card party in Queen Square had come the following week. Faye said, "And Lady Corinna, where does she winter?" He said, "The Somerset house, Carew Park." She said, "I will send word to my supplier in Bridgewater. She has a sister who goes to service at Carew Park every autumn. If Lady Corinna has been ordering foxglove extract and arsenic compound through a local apothecary, her sister will know where the deliveries went and who signed for them." He stared at her. He said, "You have a supplier in Bridgewater?" She said, "I have suppliers in 7 towns between here and Bath. I have been running this shop alone for 4 years. I know where to find things." He was quiet a moment. Then he said, "You are not afraid of Lady Corinna?" She said, "I am afraid of many things. I am afraid of losing the shop, and afraid of Ness going back to the parish, and afraid of what your cousin will do when he learns you are still alive. But there is no clean way through this that does not start from here." He said, "From here?" She said, "I will write the letters in the morning." She wrote 6. She sent them through the postal cart that came through Marsh Street at 7, and through the herb woman at the St. Nicholas market, and through the spirit merchant 3 doors down, whose wife knew the houses of half the county better than their own owners did. The first answer came on the Friday. It came in the shape of a night watchman named Ezra Plum, 41, who kept the round on Prince Street and had been on duty the Wednesday morning in question. He had noted the carriage at 20 minutes past 3, a private vehicle, dark blue, the crest on the door half covered with a cloth but the corner showing. He had noted it because the left rear wheel had a crack in the iron rim that made a particular sound on cobblestones, and he had heard that same crack when the carriage had come through on 2 prior evenings in the same week. He stood at Faye's shop door with his hands in his coat pockets and said, "I don't know what's in your back room, Mrs. Morden, and I don't require to know. I know the sound of that wheel, and I know the direction the carriage came from, which was Queen Square. I will say so in front of any magistrate you put me in front of." Faye gave him tea and a slice of bread and wrote his name in her ledger with the time of his account. She went upstairs. She said, 1. Piers said, "The wheel." She said, "Hadley's carriage. The crack has been there since July, you said." He shut his eyes. He said, "Yes." The second answer came the following Tuesday. It came through the Bridgewater herb woman's sister, a girl named Polly Marsh, 22, who had been a kitchen maid at Carew Park for 2 seasons and had been let go in June without a proper reference. She had walked 14 miles in the rain, and she was very angry. Polly Marsh sat on the workroom stool and said, without preamble, that she had seen Lady Corinna pour a measure of pale powder into a small glass bottle on 3 separate occasions: September of the previous year, February, and July, and on each occasion the bottle had been placed on the shelf in the still room where the Viscount's evening cordial was prepared. She had been let go the week after the 3rd occasion. She produced from her coat pocket a small piece of paper on which she had written the dates in her own careful hand while walking. Faye said, "Will you swear this before a magistrate?" Polly said, "Yes, and I'll say more if you want it. I'll say the name of the apothecary in Taunton who delivered the compound to the still room door, because I was the one who signed for it, and I signed under the name Mrs. Carew because I was told to, and I didn't know then what I signed for." Faye wrote down the apothecary's name. She gave Polly 3 shillings and the name of a lodging house on St. Michael's Hill. She went upstairs. She said, 2. The third came by letter, from the apothecary in Taunton, a man named Cyrus Bent, who had read Faye's letter 3 times and then written back immediately. He had supplied foxglove extract and arsenic compound to the Carew Park still room on 4 occasions in 14 months, billed to the household account under medicinal supplies. He had done so because the order had come on paper bearing the Carew Park crest, and he had no reason at that time to doubt it. He had, however, kept his copies. He enclosed them. He wrote that he would come to Bristol the following week and would speak to any party Faye cared to name. She set the letter beside the other papers. She said without turning, 3. Piers said, she billed it to the household account. Faye said, the account that your solicitor is already examining. He said, the solicitor. She said, write to him tonight. I will walk it to the post myself. He wrote the letter at the workroom bench on a board she laid across his knees. She sealed it with a candle and walked it to the post office in the rain. Ness fell ill on the 5th night. It came on quickly without warning, the child's forehead suddenly hot under Faye's hand when she leaned in to say good night. Faye went still inside in the way only certain kinds of love make a person go still. There was no name for it that did not sound like fear, because it was fear, and it was also the other thing, and she had learned to carry both at once. Piers was at the workroom bench, reading through the account copies. He looked up. He saw Faye's face. He said, what is it? She said, Ness has a fever. He said, bring her down to the cot. It is warmer here. She looked at him. He said, I will not make it worse. Whatever I had was in the glass, not in the air. She will be warmer here. He was right. She brought Ness down, wrapped in her blanket, and laid her on the cot, and Piers moved to the chair at the cot side without being asked. When Ness opened her eyes and found a man she barely knew sitting at her bedside in the small hours, Piers did not try to explain himself. He simply held out his hand, palm up, and waited until she decided. She put her fingers in his hand after a moment and closed them, and he closed his around them, and that was the arrangement for the night. He talked to her the way he had talked in the fever himself, low, slow, the sound of it more than the words. He told her about the harbour at Halifax in January, when the ice came in from the bay and turned the whole waterfront white. He told her about a dog he had kept at Carew Park as a boy, who had been afraid of thunder and hid under the hall table. He told her about Benedict, who had been afraid of nothing, and who had once climbed to the roof of the Somerset house on a dare, and then refused to come down for an hour because the view was too fine. He had not said Benedict's name aloud in 3 years. He said it 3 times that night. Ness did not hear most of it. She read his mouth when her eyes were open. She went to sleep against his arm. She did not pull her hand away. Faye kept the vigil at the range, changing the cloth at the basin, not looking at either of them more than she needed to. At the grey hour, when the fever began to break, Piers looked across the workroom at her and said, My brother was afraid of nothing, and he went out to sea in November, and I was in London, and I did not even know the ship had sailed until the letter came in January. She set down the cloth. She said, Were you the elder? He said, Yes, I am always the elder. She said, Then you know what it is to be the one who is left. He said, Yes. The range crackled. Ness slept. The 4th answer came from the solicitor, a Mr. Aldridge of Gray's Inn, who arrived in Bristol on the Thursday not by letter but in person, with a leather case under his arm and the expression of a man who has spent 3 days reading documents and has not enjoyed what he found. He sat at Faye's workroom bench and opened the case and laid out 4 items, a set of account ledgers for Carew Park covering 3 years, a bundle of letters in Lady Corinna's hand, recovered from the Somerset house by the solicitor's own clerk, a certified copy of the estate deed showing that in the event of Piers Carew's death without legitimate issue, the estate passed to Hadley Carew, and a small note, undated in Lady Corinna's hand, addressed to Hadley, which read only, The account is done if you manage the rest. Be quick about it. Piers read the note. He laid it on the workbench. He said, 4. He put his hand over his eyes for a moment. Faye did not say anything. She waited. After a long while, he put his hand down. He said, "She knew since August that I was asking about the accounts. She had 3 years of taking from those farms. She could not let me reach the solicitor with the full picture." Faye said, "The solicitor is here. He has the full picture." He said, "Yes." She said, "We will go to the magistrate Friday morning. I will go with you. I have the witnesses, and the letters and the account copies. I will speak for what I know myself." He said, "You do not need to come." She said, "I am the one who pulled you off the cobblestones. I am already in it." That night late, 2 men stood at the corner of Marsh Street and did not move for better than 20 minutes. Ness saw them from the upstairs window, where she had taken to sitting in the evenings with her slate in her lap and her eyes on the street. She came down the stairs on her bare feet and put her hand on Faye's sleeve and wrote on the slate, "2 men, standing, watching." Faye pinched out the front lamp. She took Ness to the store cupboard under the stair and settled her on the folded canvas with her blanket and her slate, and pressed one finger to her own lips. Ness nodded once. She was not afraid. She had seen Faye afraid before and knew the difference. She pulled the cupboard door closed from the inside. The 2 men tried the shop door. They tried the dispensary window. They stood in the street for another while, and then one said something to the other in a low voice, and they went. Faye counted to 150 before she moved. Then she brought Ness out and held her in the workroom chair. For a long time the child's arms around her neck, feet hanging. She was too big to be held this way. She was exactly the right size to be held this way. Piers came back at 10 minutes before 4 in the morning. He let himself in at the side door with the key she had given him. There was a cut on his jaw. He had been set on in the alley off Queen Square. 2 men, efficiently done. He had lost them through the churchyard at St. Thomas's and come back around through the Harbour lanes. He stood in the workroom and looked at her and at Ness asleep on the cot, and he said, "They know where you are." She said, "They knew before." He said, "They will come back." She said, "I know." He sat down on the bench stool. He looked at the workroom, at the shelves of bottles, at the account papers laid out in order on the bench, at the ledger with the 4 witness entries in Faye's close, clean hand. He looked at Ness on the cot. He said, "I have been a man who arranged his life to be responsible to no one. After Benedict, I could not imagine being responsible to another person again. And I went to Nova Scotia, and I managed to hold that position for 3 years, and then I came home in August, and the first thing I did was start asking questions about the farms, which is the act of a man who cannot leave well enough alone, and who is, in fact, responsible to the estate whether he likes it or not." She said nothing. He said, "I am asking you something. I am asking it badly and at the wrong hour, and I am asking it because I have 8 hours and because those men will not stop." She waited. He said, "Marry me before the hearing. There is a chaplain at the public office who keeps a licence for exactly this sort of mourning. I am asking it because your testimony cannot be challenged on the grounds of the shop and the trade and the class, if you stand as my wife when you give it. I am asking it because Ness goes on the register tomorrow as Ness Carew, and Lady Corinna cannot touch her. I am asking it for protection." He stopped. He said, "I am asking it because there is no word I have that is large enough for what you did when you hauled me off those cobblestones, and I am asking it because I do not want to leave this room and go to the magistrate and come back and find it empty." He said, "I am not asking it for love. I am telling you that plainly because you have been honest with me, and I owe you the same. The word I have tonight is necessary. You are necessary. Ness is necessary. And if the other word comes later, it comes from me and not from the arithmetic of the morning. But I have 8 hours, and I cannot find a better offer in 8 hours. Will you say yes?" She looked at him. She looked at the cut on his jaw and the steadiness of his hands and the way he had held Ness's fingers through the fever night, and said Benedict's name aloud. For the first time in 3 years, she looked at the ledger with the 4 entries in clean columns. She had been a wife beside a ghost. She had spent 6 years carrying Rory's first love in the house with her, the portrait on the shelf, the name that came up in every story he told, the particular way he went quiet on the anniversary of the first wife's death. She had been second for so long that she had made a private arithmetic of it, this much, but not this, Close, but not all the way. Here, but not entirely. He was not offering instead. He was not offering a replacement. He was offering alongside. A man who had already said Benedict's name in her hearing and not apologised for it. A man who had sat with Ness through the dark hours and told her about a dog afraid of thunder. She said, yes. He let out his breath. She said, we will go at 6. Ness will need a clean dress, and you will need that cut looked at before we walk into a public office. There are 4 witnesses and 1 solicitor, and they will all be at the magistrate's at noon, and so will we. And Lady Coroner, if she comes at all, will come expecting a report of a drowned drunkard, and she will find herself instead on the wrong side of 4 account books, and a note in her own handwriting. He said, yes. She said, and the word, necessary. She said it quietly to herself. She said, I've spent a long time feeling like a necessary woman who was not a wanted one. If the word changes later, it changes. If it does not, then we have this, and the shop, and Ness on the register, and the accounts laid out in order. I am not waiting for a different word. I am only telling you I heard this one. He looked at her for a long time. He said, I heard you. He did not touch her. He sat on the bench stool, and she sat in the workroom chair, and they kept the last of the watch together until the grey came up against the harbour window. They were married in the chaplain's side room at the Bristol public office at 22 minutes past 6 on a Friday morning in October 1827. The chaplain officiated. Ezra Plum and the solicitor Mr. Aldridge stood as witnesses. Polly Marsh stood in the doorway and cried quietly into her sleeve. Ness stood at Faye's left hand in her good blue dress, and held the Viscount's thumb in her small grip, and watched the chaplain's mouth and read every word off his lips. The magistrate's hearing opened at noon. The room was full. Word had moved through the harbour quarter the way word always moved through the harbour quarter, which was faster than the postal cart and more reliably than the newspapers. Ezra Plum took the stand first, and then Polly Marsh, and then Cyrus Bent, the Taunton apothecary, who had brought all 4 of his original delivery copies and laid them on the magistrate's table himself. The solicitor read the ledgers. The note was produced and read aloud. Lady Coroner Carew was in the 4th row of the gallery in a winter coat and a face arranged for a sympathy proceeding. She did not see Faye until the hearing opened, and Piers Carew walked into the front bench alive, in his own clothes, with a woman in plain grey wool at his right and a small girl between them. She saw it then. She went very still, in the way of a person recalculating. She was still recalculating when Faye stood, and the defence solicitor raised the objection. A woman of trade, no standing, testimony inadmissible. The magistrate looked at Faye. He said, Mrs. Carew, what do you say? Faye stood. She had worked out what she needed to say in the 6 hours before dawn, setting the words in order the way she set bottles on a shelf, each one in its place, each one labelled correctly. She looked across the room at Lady Coroner. She said, a man was left on cobblestones outside my shop door. I knew what was in him because I have worked with medicines and compounds for 11 years, and I know what poisons look like when they leave a body. I kept 4 witnesses. I wrote their accounts in my own hand. You stand here because I did not close my shop door when the carriage came down Marsh Street. Whether I have standing or not, the accounts are on the table, and the note is in your handwriting, and the wheel is in the watchman's night book. The rest is for the magistrate. She sat down. The defence solicitor sat down. The magistrate looked at his papers. Hadley Carew was brought in under constable's guard at 12:30. He was 31, and he had the look of a man who had not slept in several days, and had known for several of those days exactly how this morning would go. He did not look at Piers, he looked at the floor. It was over by 2. Lady Coroner was held on charges of attempted murder, by sustained poisoning, conspiracy and estate fraud. Hadley on the charge of attempted murder. Both were committed to the assizes. Piers stood on the front bench steps in the autumn light afterward and looked at nothing in particular for a while. Faye stood at his right. Ness stood between them. After a moment he said, "We will go home." She said, "Which home?" He said, "Yours first if you want it. The shop is yours. I have not asked you to close it." She said, The shop stays open. I will bring the equipment to the Somerset house and set up a proper dispensary in the north wing. There is always a need for one on an estate of that size. And I will come back to Marsh Street on the 1st of each month to fill the standing orders. Ness will come with us. Ness will have a tutor who communicates in writing, because that is what she is accustomed to and what she is good at. And the portrait on the shelf upstairs will come to Somerset, because it belongs to the shelf, not to the room. I will not be a wife beside a ghost if the ghost travels with me. He said, yes. She said, and the other thing. He waited. She said, you said necessary this morning. I told you I heard it. I am not asking for a different word, but I want you to know that the word I have is not necessary in return. I have not found the word yet. When I find it, I will tell you plainly, because that is how I work. And if it happens to be the same word as yours eventually, then it is the same word, and there is no arithmetic in it. He was quiet for a moment. He said, from here. She looked at him. He said, not necessary, not instead. From here, that is the word I should have used this morning. She said, from here. Ness between them tugged Faye's sleeve. She held up her slate. She had written on it, in her careful round letters, the words she had read off both their lips. From here. Faye read it. She looked down at Ness, who looked back at her with the calm, clear face of a child who has been a witness all her life, and who has decided about this particular thing, and is at peace with what she has decided. Faye nodded. She said it aloud, for all three of them, in the October light outside the Bristol public office. From here. 14 months passed. In December of 1828, the North Wing dispensary at Carew Park was fully fitted. It was Faye's own arrangement. The shelves built to her specification, the labels in her own hand, the small table at the window, where she sat on Tuesday and Thursday mornings and received anyone from the estate who came with a need. The ledger on the table was the same style as the Marsh Street ledger. She had brought 6 of them down from Bristol in a crate. The Somerset house was large and cold in ways the Harbour shop had not been, and it had taken her 3 months to learn which rooms were warm at which hours, and where the draughts came through, and which fires needed the most attention. She had learned it the way she had always learned things, by paying attention. Ness had a tutor, a quiet man from Clifton, who communicated by written note, and had adapted to the slate board inside a fortnight. They wrote notes to each other all day, and left them in a tin on the schoolroom windowsill, and the pile of notes was growing into what Faye privately considered the beginning of a correspondence. On the 1st of each month, Faye made the ride to Bristol and opened the Marsh Street shop for 3 days, and filled the standing orders, and spoke to the woman she had taken on to manage the day-to-day, a sensible widow of 40 who needed no particular instruction and gave none. Lady Corinna had been tried at the assizes in January, convicted on all charges, transportation for life. She had not written from the ship. Hadley had received 7 years' transportation, served in part due to his testimony against his mother. Polly Marsh was housekeeper at Carew Park. Her character reference now said considerably more than reliable. On a Tuesday afternoon in December, Faye was at the dispensary window with the ledger when she heard the door and looked up. It was Piers. He stood in the doorway with his coat collar turned up against the Somerset cold, and a folded sheet of paper in his hand. She waited. He said, I found a word. She set down the ledger. He said, I have been looking for it since October. I have been going at it the way I go at the estate accounts, methodically from the beginning, checking each entry against what I actually know to be true, and I have found it. She said, tell me. He crossed the room, he sat down on the bench opposite her, and unfolded the paper. It was a letter he had started and not sent. His own handwriting stopped halfway down the page. He turned it over and wrote one word on the blank side, and he laid it on the dispensary table between them, and he took his hand away. She read the word. Home. She looked up at him. He said, not the house, not the title. You are the word I kept looking for and could not find, and the word is home, and I know that is not a small thing to say to a person who has been careful all her life not to let a word mean too much. but it is the true word, and I have done the accounting on it, and it holds." She looked at him for a long time. Outside the window, the December light was going early. Inside, the range was warm, and the shelves were full, and the ledger was open, and the Tuesday liniment was measured and waiting. She said, "I found mine." He waited. She said, "Certain." She said it the way she said most things, plainly, without decoration, with the full weight of having considered it. "I am certain of you. I have been certain since the night on the cobblestones, and I have been waiting to trust that I was not wrong about what certain meant. I am not wrong." He did not take her hand. He laid his hand on the table between them, open, the way he had held it out to Ness in the fever night, and after a moment she put hers into it, and his fingers closed around hers. They stayed that way while the light went out of the December window and the range settled, and somewhere upstairs in the schoolroom, Ness and her tutor left their notes in the tin on the sill and came down for supper. Not waiting, not instead, not after. From here,